Hello and welcome to Ancient Stone Carving Technology Explained Part 2. In the last part of Part 1, I showed this photo and I thought this place was real, but somebody said it wasn't, so maybe it isn't, but I wasn't looking at tool marks so much as just the shape of this thing, and I have no idea if it's real or what, so sorry about that. I didn't mean to mislead anyone. But it does look pretty cool, and it's, too bad it's not real. So in part 1, just to do some review, in case you didn't see part 1, and that way when we move on to the actual evidence of ancient stone carving technology, it'll make a little bit more sense when I start explaining how each one was done, I think. And this is just a handy little chart that tells you what minerals to look for in what rocks. And I went over the crystal structures and show how the atoms are put together here. And you get all these unique shapes, which I indicated could be used somehow with the particle beam and or sonic frequencies or resonances to break these crystals apart on the atomic level. And just the several different ways of identifying crystal structures and more shapes. This is how every rock is formed. No matter which rock it is, it's on here somewhere. The igneous rocks down here, we have granite would be the red one down here. It's an intrusive, and then anything extrusive would be out here, meaning that the magma made it to the surface and cooled, and you'll get rhyolite, andesite, basalt, just a finer grained material of what's down here, which would be granite, diorite, gabbro. And the obvious difference is the crystal sizes in the slower cooling magma down here are much larger. And therefore, maybe there's a connection with granite having the larger crystals being useful for many different purposes involving energy and so on. And you can have crystals in crystals, and these would be large crystals here, but this was not formed in granite. But feldspar is got its own crystal structure, and you'll see a lot of that in granite. And the Mohs hardness scale. But very importantly are the thin sections. These are pieces of the stone that are sliced so thin you can almost see through them. And you look at this under a microscope with a polarizing lens, and then you can do cross-polarizing, and as you rotate it, you can look at every single crystal face in there, and also the colors will change, and you can identify the rocks. So if you were to take a thin section of the stone in an undisturbed area and then compare it with an area that you thought may have been disturbed by a particle beam, then you should see some signs of that in the thin section. But to my knowledge, nobody has done that, but it's just a matter of time. You'd actually have to get a piece of the evidence, which would be defacing, so you have to be careful, I guess. You wouldn't want to go to jail for 10 years. And then this is a zoom in, and of course all this would change colors. And then I went over just quickly about the particle beam itself, and my main point is we do have it now, but I think it's in a very primitive state of development. It has not been miniaturized. It has not been primarily used for peaceful purposes, and so they're going in the other direction here. But basically, as I have underlined here, a particle beam uses a high energy beam of atomic or subatomic particles to damage or the target by disrupting its atomic and or molecular structure. Therefore, the coverage of the crystals that I showed you earlier, that they're just made up of molecules and atoms which can be damaged. And a particle beam is a type of directed energy which directs energy in a particle and focus direction using particles with minuscule mass. And probably might want to just read the whole thing here, but moving down, we have here in the middle, to destroy a target is to simply overheat it until it is no longer operational. And then down at the bottom, these particles have tremendous kinetic energy which they impart to matter in the target, inducing near instantaneous and catastrophic superheating at the surface, and when penetrating deeper, ionization takes place. So I was wondering if this could be how they vitrified so many of these stones that you see with this really nice glassy surface on there, and those boxes in the Serapeum. Am I saying that right? And they have, almost looks like they've been varnished, but it's lasted thousands and thousands of years, which means I think that the actual stone has been changed or altered to get this vitrification, which means technically that the outside of the stone would be glass. So there, again, we need a thin section. And that will tell us for sure what's going on there. Because glass is not a mineral. It doesn't have a distinct crystal structure at all. And I also covered when these ancient civilizations could have existed. Well, it was inhabited up to 400 million years ago, and I'm thinking the last 65 million years looks pretty good. We're in an ice age that's been going on for 2.4 million years. Now we have the effects of directed energy, and it's called the Hutchison effect. You can look it up, study that, and you can see that it does change the molecular structure here quite a lot, and it works on metal too. It also levitates, so remember that you can use this energy for levitating and possibly making things weightless, like 2,000-ton stones, for instance. Directed energy being tested. We have sandstone thin section. You can see it's just a lot finer grain, but you can still tell exactly. This is like a fingerprint, you know. If you want to match up a word, did this stone come from the same quarry or what? You have thin sections, and if they look the same, it's the same stone. But keep in mind that different parts of the quarry could have different, still have different minerals in the same stone. And this is granite. You can imagine then, this never made it to the surface, so the entire mountain's been worn off. Granite, the preferred building stone on the bottom, with limestone on the top. And granite comes in all these different colors, and you can see the larger grain size. I also explained how if you were to miniaturize this technology to the point where a person, or a humanoid I should say, or even a cyborg, or even a drone could have any number of these tools, shapes and sizes, whereas this piece here would be a different shape, and you can have your particle beam emitters right here. Also, you could throw in some sonic frequencies too to shake the crystals apart once they've been what I call disassociated somehow or broken up. And to get these scoop patterns that we see, you would use something shaped like this. And of course the bottom part here would be it could be flat, it could be more curved, smaller, wider. And if you were using a laser particle beam to destroy this rock, you could slice it like a regular laser beam, except that you wouldn't have all the melted rock mess all over the place. It'd be real easy to slice the stone. Just depends on from which angle you slice it. Here is how the actual disruptor would work. We have the scoop marks. You could have a radiating beam to make the scoop marks. You could have a focused beam on the right. This would be just for general surfacing of the stone, maybe to roughen it up, and also to grind down the stone to the point where you could have the knobs sticking out. I haven't quite figured out what those knobs are for, but we'll get into that too, because there's 3 different stages of those knobs. And this would be to make like these snake-like vitrified channels seen on a stone we'll be looking at. So remember this. This, of course, could be any shape. And all of these, just about all of these stones have bevels that are put into the stone afterwards, like on the top here where they don't quite match. One's higher obviously than the other, or maybe this one might come up over here. So they bevel these down and you end up with this, and the corners aren't always rounded. They are quite straight and very flat, and so you end up with this here. So you have the the nice curves here when you're done beveling. But of course we're told it's all done with hammers and chisels and pounders. That's how they make these beautiful obelisks, with hammers and chisels and pounders. I also covered the glaciation periods when I thought that the civilizations may have existed. The coldest parts or the most extended ice sheets are down here at the bottom. Not the best time to be having a civilization on planet Earth, but any time in between here, from say 140,000 to 20,000, looks like it was really nice during that time. But like I said, we're in the middle of an ice age that's been going on for 2.4 million years. And we can use the ice map too to match up, and they correlate pretty close. Now this is about the Younger Dryas mini ice age. They think maybe it only took a few months for the latest glaciation, I should say. It keeps calling it an ice age, but it's not really. It's a glaciation period. And looking at an actual evidence of ancient stone carving technology, we have, this is the one where it looks like the big claw marks through the stone. And over here we have 2 right in a row here, and it looks like the instrument has 2 particle beams on it, because when it stopped it hesitated, and here is the center of the particle beam, and then notice the material around and at the end where it hesitated almost looks like it got liquefied somehow, but it doesn't look like it was heated, although it could be heat just in the immediate area, but I really doubt it. I think it was just fallen apart to the point where it almost was liquid, and then when the beam moves away it becomes solid again. So we have these 2 that are parallel, and then the thickness of the cut here is thick, and then we have a little thinner between the ones up here on the upper right and the ones these 2 terminate. I don't have the full picture, but they terminate about the same spot. So it looks like it was a double beam coming down at the same time. and that's why this area is a little narrower, but the distance between the two cutter beams here were pretty consistently wider. And we have the scoop marks. And obviously no hammers and chisels here, but that tool that I showed you fits that perfectly. And it almost looks like the edges. You can see where it didn't quite fall out when it went through, and so it solidified again, or it was never dissolved. So when they say that the rock looks like it was softened and carved, they're kind of right. You don't need to soften the entire rock just to carve the surface. When your particle beam tool will soften the rock as you go. Be interesting to know how fast they can move this thing down the stone. But it looks like where this was, almost looks to me like it was done by hand, because it's not perfectly straight. But there are cases, not with the scoop marks, but other cases with the tool marks, as we call them, where it's too straight to be held by any kind of a humanoid, maybe a cyborg or a drone possibly, or the device was mounted on some kind of a larger machine with some kind of a rail on it or something. So, having said that, it's time to move on to Ancient Stone Carving Technology Explained, Part 2. I can't think of a better place to start than Peru. And I want to take this moment to give special thanks to Brian Forrester, who is our boots on the ground, who takes the best photos and uses really nice cameras. He's got a new drone, and I almost wish I was there, but I can't afford the tour. So if you can't afford it, you got to see these every video he has, because seeing things from the ground is one thing, but the drones really make it nice. And he does good close-ups, and you can really see what's going on. And he knows what we're looking for, and he knows what's going on. So again, thank you. So we'll start in Peru, but since Baalbek is one of my favorite sites, I've got a lot of stuff to cover there. Bolivia, China, India, and there's a lot of photos. So what I'll do is I'll just stay on these until I get about to the first hour, then stop there, and then just continue on part 3 wherever I happen to be. Not every single photo is going to be showing evidence of ancient stone carving technology. Some are just nice photos, but there's a lot of comments that I'm going to make, but I'm going to be asking a lot of so here we have Cusco. This is in Cusco. It's up on the hill. And just a few things I want to point out here right away is, first thing we notice was we have the knobs, 2 knobs per stone. We have 1 or maybe 2 stones. I don't know if that's 1 stone or 2, but it's missing. Nowhere to be found, just gone. And a couple things about this picture I'd like you to see is, first of all, the absolute perfectly straight edges here that could not have been cut with a saw. The slightly rounded corner. We have a channel on the bottom on this stone, or the top of this stone here, and then we have a tongue here, so we got like a tongue and groove set up here to keep these from sliding. Only experienced wall builders would do that. So whoever made this wall has been making walls for a long time. And the technology has been perfected, and for earthquakes and so on. Now, over here, and I'll zoom this up a little bit, there is a little bit of beveling going on. I think this is the latest stage of their perfecting of the stone carving technology here as far as making the walls go. All of these knobs are square, but they're not consistently, you know, they're different shapes, but they're mostly square. This one down here on the bottom here, that's like the smallest one I've ever seen. It's just a slot. But I think these knobs all came out a lot farther than what we're seeing now, just because of erosion. Although some of them do look fairly flat, like, you know, this one. It looks fairly straight, but it's kind of eroded. I think that they were sharper when they were new. And I wonder if that could almost be used to date some of this stuff. You know, it's a little hard to date just by looking at the surface, but then when you have these protrusions, they really take a beating. So I don't know. But this is obviously advanced. All of these cuts had to have been done with a laser, a rock cutting laser, particle beam laser. So in this photo, I'm most interested in this wall here on the right, because when we zoom in, what I'm trying to decide is how flat on the bottoms are these stones. This looks pretty flat, but then when we come here, we see this rounded part here, and I'm not sure, but that looks like it was scooped out or ground out. But it does look like it comes up a little bit. I'm not sure, but then it's flat here. The problem here is if this stone is like bulging on the bottom, and this is cut to fit, like this over here, like say it would look like this, then you couldn't cut it with the laser first, and it would be too hard to round this out and then round that off to make them fit absolutely perfectly. So I'm suspecting that that's a perfectly flat surface in there, and that they managed to make it look like this just by rounding the edges and stuff. But this was ground out, and I think probably the same story over here, is this was cut initially, laser cut out, and then they may have done a little bit of grinding on it to give it the, you know, the rounder look there. But everything else is pretty much a flat, straight cut. Even this, if that's totally flat, and if you look over here, in fact, I can zoom in on that. Oh, how'd that happen? The wrong button again. Really zoom in on that. That looks pretty flat. Absolutely flat and straight. And it looks like it cracked, and so it slipped down a little bit. And lucky for us, because now we can see that that is a totally flat surface. So if that's flat, then it's probably equally flat this way. So if you were to make the cut this way, straight through, it all works. So as far as the stages, which I think at least 3 stages of construction exist here as far as their age goes. I would say that this was the middle part, the middle of their total stone wall building in this area. So I think it must have gone on for quite some time in order for the stone walls to become from a rougher state to the newer, smoother, even tighter, you know, fitting, earthquake-proofed stonework like we just saw earlier, the first photo. So this would be like a mid-range, and in mid-range, I think, is because of the roughness of the stones in general. They're not nearly as smooth and flat. They're left to be a little rougher. Probably they just liked the rough style, who knows. But they do have the knobs. They're mostly on the bottom, and we still see them in pairs, but because of the, you know, just the roughness of the stone itself, the way that it protrudes out a little more. This would put it, I think, in the mid-range, and then when I show you the real old ones, you see what I'm saying. It's hard to see, but there is a bevel right through here, because these stone protrusions here can't be too close to the bottom, or it doesn't quite look right. So they always make sure that there's a little space down there, and they'll bevel it if they have to. And there's also the lack of the beveling here too. But you can see this laser straight cut here, obviously. And I'm not sure if I could see anything more here. It's starting to get that Baalbek look. So they had the laser beam going here. Even the stones in the back have that mid-range rough look. This one right here, for instance, very bulbous. Even though they fit with laser accuracy here, they don't seem to quite have the interlocking pattern that you see on the big wall there in Saskatchewan. So, and we'll look at those, plenty of those, but right now you can get a view of where we're really at here. And this is a really interesting passageway. That's why I think it's pretty old. I don't think this is new, but I don't think it's the oldest construction that they have there. This seems to show different levels from different times. We've got, looks like Inca, but up here at the top, I think this would probably be the newest construction of the ancient builders, because of the wall, the designs. There are distinct rows here. You can actually follow these rows all the way across. It comes in little layers, and you can follow them and just pile them in there. So everything is in, you can see how it was built from the bottom up. Then down here, it's the rougher looking stones. It's still nice, but it's not this nice. I'm told the Incas did all of this down here. I'm not sure about that. Maybe some of this would be some of the old style building, and then it had to be built up. And then there's the question of where did all the stones go? I mean, why did they have to put all these little pieces in here? Because if they just rolled down the mountain or rolled down somewhere, they should be there, but they don't seem to be. So, and could they have all been quarried? And if they were quarried, then that means that they had to have been quarried before the Inca even got there. Then where did all the stones go? And just a closer view here of the the final stages of their construction abilities here. Everything's super tight fitting. This has been here for thousands and thousands of years. And also the way they incorporate it into the existing rock too here is extremely interesting. I don't know if there were stones over that, but it doesn't look like it. It looks like for some reason they wanted to expose that rock there and just build it right into the wall, which is really cool. Not a lot of beveling here because of the accuracy of the blocks, the way they're ground down and smoothed out here. There's really no need. There's probably some minor beveling here. I can see one right here, it looks like. Yeah. Zoom in on that. Oh my God, I lost it. Where is it? I just saw it there. Oh. Well, it is hard to tell, but we have some extra straight lines here, but it looks like it was beveled here, and then, just to clean up this corner here. Okay, so the first thing I notice here is the scoop marks. I'm going to zoom in. One question I have is, when were the scoop marks done? Were they done after the, somewhere later along the line, and this is one method used to actually deface the stone? Because it doesn't make any sense they would go to all that work of making these big stones and then have this, and it looks like there was something here that was defaced off of there. So whoever had this tool, access to this tool, seems they came through and did a lot of stuff like this, totally unnecessary. And it looks like it was used over here too, down here a little bit. So it looks like not only did they use the technology to build things, but to reshape maybe previous constructions. Like this looks like it was just shaved right off, whatever it was. Doesn't really look like it was broken off. And we do have the big square protrusions here, one on each stone. And as we've seen, these also have them. And they don't go back as far back as these either, as that from that view on the top. So we obviously have this device that is just carving away on this stone. This didn't just happen from erosion. And also it looks like there's a missing, something's going on here. I don't understand the space down here. Unless they dug down and then piled stones up or something. Or this piece on the right came all the way across and it didn't matter. But that seems a little strange, although the stone is, the way this curves down a little bit, is being supported. Just because it gets smaller so it fits into this groove. That's probably the only thing that kept it going down, so they were able to pound stones in, I guess. And also the way this wall comes around the corner and continues this way. This must have been one big place. And there's scoop marks on the far right. And these look like gouges. Look at the way it's gouged in. It's almost like rounded out. And then obviously this was shaved off somehow. Looks like a pretty flat blade, but every time you see the scoop marks, it's always rounded on the edge, just like that tool that I was showing, the garden sprayer. But that was to give you an idea how it fits. This one's kind of flat and it's just sort of rounded on the edges. More of the tight-fitting stones. This would be the later construction, I'm pretty sure, because they're a lot smoother, not very many bevel marks. And you'll see the bevel marks coming up. We really haven't seen any good ones yet. I'm just showing these just so you can get an idea, you know. Now this begins to show the bevel marks pretty well. We have some exfoliation of the rock here. And granite does do that, but I'm not sure what kind of stone that is. If we zoom in, we can see the careful detention that's made right here on both sides, grinding here, and these are at a different angle too sometimes. This will be like a lesser angle than maybe this side. Comes around, and this is completely different from this surface, but also notice that the surface is rough, and I think that is weathering. And it almost looks like the crystals are too big to be granite, so I'm not sure what this is. It could be andesite or something. But in any case, wherever the bevels are, the stone is not as eroded as you would expect it to be. Eroded the same, you know, as it is out here. But the bevels are still pretty pristine, which to me indicates that you would have some kind of rearrangement of the stone itself. This even looks like it. See how it's almost like it was soft. It got a kind of like it got just pushed up, like they have a beveling spatula, or, you know, spatula where they can just, it just has this super flat edge on it, like right here. Starts right here. Those are how it's eroded here, but then right here, where the bevels start, it's still really smooth. Now this is starting to look like granite here. Right in here, you'll see very low erosion, still flat, almost as if it's been, you know, vitrified somehow, but somehow the atomic structure could have been just compacted a little bit, which would make it more less porous and less likely to be eroded. And quite often you'll see not necessarily a bevel, but an area where it was just ground down a little bit along the edge without having to worry about beveling it, and then they just left it that way with this material up here not actually being taken down. But nevertheless, it's still usually not as rough as it is around it. So if we were down at the quarry and we had our particle beam laser going, it would just about have to be mounted on some kind of a lateral rail in order for this wall to look like this, because every one of these stones has to be exactly the same height across the wall. The different layers can be different heights each, but going across they have to be, because in order to get this to fit absolutely perfectly, you'd have to have the exact heights all done right. And you can do this with a laser, just straight cuts, and then just cut the backs off, and that's it. You can curve them. Lasers can cut curves. A saw could never cut a curve, and some of these do have curves, as you'll see later. Quite curvy. Not really much beveling here, so I would say that this was getting towards the later end of their development on the stone wall building. You would think that when they showed up here that it would have already been graduated up to this point here, but it looks like there was a certain amount of trial and error, and which kind of surprises me. I don't even know if that's true what I'm saying, because you think they would show up with the same technology. It just looks like they somehow refined it as time went on. Here we have extreme evidence of ancient stone carving technology. So here's one bevel, and notice how it's so smooth, almost like somebody sanded it down yesterday. They just came through and it just did a perfect bevel on here. Now, I wonder, it could have been done by hand, obviously, but the problem with hands is it's really hard to make something perfectly flat and straight like that. Unless you had, I don't know, maybe a longer tool or something, and the device had a wider beam or something on it, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem right. It just almost seems like it was literally scraped off, but they're so flat. And the absence of erosion on these surfaces is pretty mystifying, but not if you think about it on a subatomic level. And the beveling was done here. You can see it. Straight flat edges, sharp, smooth, as compared to the rougher out here. This one's really taking a beating, but if you look real close, you can almost see this little flat edge coming along right here, where it's still smooth and straight. And of course the laser accuracy here on these stones. Now it also makes me wonder too that if these were cut out of the quarry right next to each other, then every stone would have to be the same type. But I keep seeing stones like this, even though if you look at the weathered part here, it does have the same look as this. So maybe if you break it open, that's what it looks like. Maybe somebody just broke that open in the last couple hundred years or something. But I do see stones that are different, which means they didn't come from the same quarry, yet they have the same laser, cut along the edge. Now the only thing that could possibly mean is that all of this stuff, if it's done on a computerized level, then this pattern has probably already been laid out, and every stone is already, it's already predetermined according to the diagram that what size they're going to be. So if the computer, this laser cutting device, knew what the shape of the stone was, it wouldn't matter what quarry it's at. You could get the stone anywhere, It would cut out the exact same dimension because that's what it's programmed to do. That stone, that's the way the wall was designed. This is stone number whatever, and it has that shape. So therefore you could have different stones and in the same wall and it would still fit perfectly. And why am I saying they use computers? Well, because we're not the only ones that have invented electricity, and computers are basically electricity. I mean, you pull the plug, what good is it? Pull the plug on humanity's electricity, we'll be right back in the Stone Age almost instantly. So I think this electricity, it's all part of it here. These people knew about it. I think they even harnessed the energy in the Earth's magnetic field, because if you can do it, then they did it, okay? I don't know if it can be done or not, but it makes sense to me. And also, if they came from somewhere other than Earth, and there's like 1 trillion places that could be, then they obviously had ships to get here, so they had this technology for quite a long time. Who knows how long? Could be thousands of years, maybe hundreds, maybe hundreds of thousands, who knows? But there was plenty of time to perfect it and miniaturize it and get it to do everything you wanted it to do. Every device, handheld, mechanized, computerized. Obviously, they had to have had drones. We have drones. We're not the only ones in the universe with drones, I'm sure. So, you have to just realize that just because we have it doesn't mean they didn't. Obviously, there was a problem with Earth. It had a catastrophe, as often does happen, and they either all died out or they left. And I think when they left, there just wasn't enough room for everybody, or maybe they didn't have enough warning, who knows. But I'm sure they took their tools with them. You don't leave your tools lying around. And I don't think everybody had access to this technology either. This was coveted. It was, even hoarded or hidden. And peasants didn't really need to know how to do all this. Who knows if they had labor? They probably had their own laborers, that were, really good at this stuff. And they just went around building everywhere. I don't think they just built here in Peru. You see the same exact evidence of practically the same exact devices being used all over the whole world. China, Middle East, everywhere. The same bevel marks, the same claw marks where they're doing the heavy duty, the same protrusions sticking out. They're all over the pyramids in Egypt. They're everywhere. So who would think to put protrusions on stones in Egypt and in Peru at the same time? Well, obviously they were connected. I think the globe was connected, these different civilizations that were planted here probably. But I think the builders were like a separate entity. They built for everybody, they build to suit, okay? And then when we get over to India, I'll show you how they built to suit over there. They had the tools, but I don't think they just passed these things out for everybody to use. And, maybe they had to be paid a certain way, and they wanted gold. Who knows what they wanted? I'm sure they didn't just do it for fun. So I hate to say it was a business because that's so human, but obviously there was some arrangement because the walls are there, they got built, and these tool marks are all over the whole world. And if you are a builder, it doesn't mean you have to build the same stuff everywhere. You can do anything you want. So anyway, moving on to the next stone here. Get down. Hopefully I won't hit the wrong button here. Okay, now this is the oldest style here. The oldest of all of the ancient stone carving technology is this. And the reason I'm saying that is because you can see the roughness of the stone, of course. So it's the oldest because it's the most eroded. Just no doubt about that. They had the lasers because everything is laser fit. But interestingly enough, is that they didn't have protruding knobs. Instead, they all have these. They're like, not protrusions, but the opposite. just kind of carved out in kind of a random way. So what did that mean? You know, is this mark like, is this like the first era, and then a new era is marked with stones that have different protrusions? It's got to have something. I think the protrusions have something to do with just the heritage of the builders themselves or something. I don't know. But this is very unusual that a whole lot of these stones don't have the protrusions, and they weren't broken off. These were made this way, I'm pretty sure. And so here we have the scoop marks again. And I guess the question is, was this done later, or did they actually put these stones in here with these marks here? It just seems rather hasty. And it almost looks like this was carved maybe afterwards, after the stones were put in, and then someone came along and just did this. So was this to cover up something? Or were they just grinding it down for no reason? But it just seems a bit sloppy to go to all this work and then leave stones that look unfinished. Maybe they are unfinished. Maybe that's what all the scoop marks are about on the stones, is that they're just unfinished, and this is just the way they start to surface it, and then they come in with other tools to kind of roughen it up and smooth it off, give it that bulbous look. So I'd say this was like the mid to early time period. Really not, it's not the precision beveling. It's like it's roughly beveled if you look, though. It's just kind of ground off because they don't want sharp edges sticking up, it would look really stupid. So a lot of these stones stick out higher than the others, way higher. So this would have to be the earlier construction. But here you can see a scoop mark. They started here, went down, started here, went down. In fact, I'm almost seeing lines on it, because a lot of times you'll see lines, and I'm not sure what the lines are unless it's just a row of tiny emitters, and they just leave streaks, or if it's something that slides and just pieces of the stone are caught in there somehow, cutting grooves as it moves along through the pre-softened stone. And also noteworthy here is this stone on the upper left here looks extremely eroded and old. But am I seeing a surface here that looks pristine? Right here? Possibly. And also, there are stones missing off the top here. This looks to me like the earliest construction for two reasons. The stone is extremely weathered, and the care, taken to smooth the surfaces just isn't there. But we do see a bevel. A very nice one right here. And look at the end of it, how it curves in, like they just started in here and just went right here and then just straight down. This is perfectly smooth. Fairly smooth as compared to the rest of the erosion, which as far as I'm concerned means that when this was done, it made the stone so that it was impervious practically to erosion. The tighter you pack those molecules together, the less erosion you're going to have. Period. It's like glass. I mean, a piece of glass can just lay there forever and nothing ever happens. Absolutely perfectly straight lines here. This looks to me like the newest construction. Very smooth, tight fitting. Not a whole lot of use of beveling, but it is there. It's down here. You can see, you'll see there is very careful beveling done. It's not very sloppy at all. But this particular photo shows that this center stone was not cut out of the quarry right next to these other stones. And this is a pretty precise shape here, which can easily be digitalized as far as a computer is concerned. It knows that's all it has to be. So it could have been this was taken from a different part of the quarry. Maybe they ran into some bad rock. But you can see the, these white lines right here are not up here or there. So that's just one more clue. It didn't come from the same, adjacent rocks. So does not that then show that this can be taken from anywhere as long as the programmed laser cutter knows what shape it is? Maybe the one that they took out originally, somehow it broke and they couldn't use a broken one or something. Or just something was wrong with it. Maybe it had a bad blemish, They said, no way we're going to use that stone. We better get another. Smaller knobs. Don't see the big knobs anymore. They're kind of toned them down a little bit. I still say that these were probably a little sharper. Because you got to think, erosion, people up there touching them and beating on them and stuff. But this is some pretty precision work here. Much more precision than any of the earlier style building by these builders. And here's a real nice shot of this wall. We show the absolute precision building here. This is obviously the later, and this wall too looks pretty new. Still using the knobs, but they're on the bottom. But what the striking thing about this photo is it just shows how much of the stone is missing, because this wall up here is missing more stones all the way across the top. So they must have come all the way out over here. All of these are gone. So that means that this wall probably came up as high as that wall. And it could have been covered with something at one time. Or maybe just open to the air. It might have had windows on it like this, on this side looking out. Anyway, where did all these stones go? And would the Inca just leave them lying around like this? So this must have been quarried after the Inca were gone. All these stones. Missing, or because if they just rolled down, all these are not that big. It seems like they could have just found them down there and then put them back into place. That would be a lot easier than running around looking like over here on the right where they have these piled in there like that. Wouldn't it be easier just to find the original stone and stick it back in there? I mean, they all fit like a jigsaw. On this grainy photo, which is not the newest construction, but it's still older, but apparently they still had all of the devices and tools, I think, early on. It doesn't make any sense why it would be so rough as compared to the newer construction is just so smooth. But here is a super bevel down here where they just took off the whole corner of this thing. Started off small and then got bigger as it went. This is not a real good picture, but this also is beveled, so they had the bevels. And also, they used the scoop tool on here somewhere. I see some here. There was another mark over here. So they are using the same devices, but not attaining the same results that they got who knows how long later. I mean, how long did this go on? From the earlier construction to the later construction, it almost seems like it puts them there for quite a long time, like hundreds of years maybe. Meaning, of course, that whoever built these walls, I'm trying to establish, well, how long were they there? Because it looks like, if you just go by the erosion factor alone here, it looks like they were there for quite a long time. One thing to note, we don't find the bodies or any evidence that they were there, so only one can assume is that they were just clean. I mean, they didn't leave garbage around. They did whatever with the dead bodies, because unless we do start digging and find bodies, I mean, like really old bodies from the original people that lived where these walls were built and stuff. So anyway, just another example of the later, newer construction style. A lot tighter, although it doesn't have the earthquake, proof a polygonal structure here, but the wall seems to have held up pretty good because a lot of the rest of this place is a lot of earthquake damage has been done. And then these knobs here are awfully strange. They stick way out. They seem to be more round than they are square. But there they are nevertheless, and then Inca built onto that. It's hard to believe that wall is still standing. I think this is downtown Cusco, I'm not sure, but over here on the right, a real nice bevel mark. On this would be, I still think, the later construction, but we do have this exfoliation of the rock, which would indicate, you know, old, but not like worn down like this. That looks like it got broken off, but there's a real nice bevel here. So if you're ever walking through there, check that out with a magnifying glass, and you'll see what I mean about it having this almost vitreous surface on it, which is obviously faded through time, but still nevertheless very smooth and clean looking. And Sacsayhuaman. And look at the size of this place. It would take me all day just to see everything. But there's an enormous number of stones that are missing here. And they weren't laying around out here, so somebody took them. But these walls went up a lot higher. But just to see the scale of the quarrying that's going on, and still the walls stand. So that's amazing. But you know what? I think that if any of these stones are found down here in this city anywhere, and it can be shown that the stones came from here, we need to pull those stones and, you know, put them up here somewhere, make a big pile or whatever, because that wasn't right. And they didn't just get washed away or anything, because they're not laying anywhere. No matter how big the catastrophe, that many stones could not have disappeared. And here's a photo of what I would call the mid-range construction. Very tight, but not quite as refined. And we have extremely nice case of the beveling right here. Well, you know, the history of the planet and the civilizations on the planet is all written in stone. And here is one big clue right here. If we look up at the top, there's a really nice bevel cut, and this would be in the third stage level of construction. But we have a very sharp bevel right here, very smooth. And as it comes down through here, this is very interesting because this is very smooth. And if you look closely here, this looks extremely smooth. And it looks also like this surface all over here is worn down, but not here. This is protruding up to make it look like you maybe went through here with a spatula or something, and this was a material that just squeezed out under the blade, which is still possible. But it somehow has been altered to be, you know, impervious to weathering. And it looks like this stone has actually worn down that much. And another sign that this is the third level of development on the wall building is this little tiny curve upwards right here. Very small, but everything fits perfectly, so it had to have been laser cut. It's the only way you can get it that sharp. And over here, the bevel went right through the bottom part of the knob. And you can see where it actually goes in right here. And I'm surprised that sometimes it does look like a little sloppy, so you wonder, well, did a person do this? A person probably would have started over here just to make a smooth edge all the way, but for some reason, like it starts here, and then it's just this clean cut that goes around this way. And these rounded edges almost look like they were, like if this wasn't worn down, this probably might have come up and been smooth, you know, and rounded more. These are obviously worn down. But, you know, another beveled edge along here. But it's almost like they when they put the bevel in, after that, then they sort of sandblasted it kind of, just to round off the edge after putting the bevel in. And because of the erosion and then this being super resistant, it seems to stand out more, almost as if it was, you know, squeezed through like with a spatula on soft rock. But it looks like they at least cut it off. I mean, they didn't just, you know, squeeze it, you know, out of there like it was soft. I think it was just literally just cuts straight down, and everything just falls right off. And here's another view of the missing stone wall. And over on the right, more evidence of machining right along this edge here, and then the rounded part right under the knob that looks like it got busted off. And that's another thing too, when these knobs, you know, that wasn't busted off like probably real lately, but a long time after this stone was put here because of the color of the, you know, the rock. These look really worn down too, and they look dark, but some photos they don't really look any darker than the rest of the rock. So it could be just the light, but you know, just the break. But it does have some lichen in it, so it happened quite a while ago. The Cutumbo Towers in Peru are also laser cut, but judging from the roughness, it's not the perfectly smooth surfaces like we saw on the later. So I would put this at mid-construction as far as the dating goes of whenever the civilization that was building these things, all of the constructions all over the whole world. I would say this was probably earlier, and who knows also, was this being built around the same time, or you know, some of the earlier stuff at say Saskatchewan. What was the time frame as far as building that went on in the Middle East and India and so on? Because if we could just get all of those dated, you know, around the same time, of course that would help. And here's a shot of a later constructed wall that looks like it got defaced with the surfacing tool here. Right here, all through here. Gouge marks. And the other stones are untouched. So maybe there was some kind of inscriptions or something here. But doesn't look like chisels did that. And this is certainly an original wall because it's sitting perfectly on these blocks here. And then it looks like the Inca did this here. So this one must have been up over here, and so the blocks that this one was on, because I think this wall actually fit right up into this corner. Lift this end up. The blocks under it are gone, so that's kind of curious how the blocks, you know, disappeared from underneath it, because you can see how it extends out. So this had to be sitting up here on that, probably more stones around it, and totally flat and smooth. And I think this was probably also done with lasers, but it would have to be a really long laser cut for them to come from this end and go all the way through, you know, whatever the length of this is. So who knows what kind of capability they had. Well, on the other hand, they could have had like a scooping thing too, mounted on a rail. They would just go back and forth and scoop it, you know, with computer machine accuracy. Again, not possible that this could have been cut with a saw because it's curved and everything fits way too perfect to be done with by hand at all. This had to be done by a machine, but obviously it had to be some kind of a computer guided laser. And these stones fit so tight together that there's not even any beveling done at all. But there are these smaller knobs. So the knobs are still there. So back at Saskatchewan, scoop marks everywhere. And right here, up on these stones, right across, all across here. Oh, and there's a whole row, or maybe many rows, missing from the top of this wall. But look at all the scoop marks. They're over here, they're over here, And there's a lot of these indented, indents here. There really seems to be an absence of knobs on the lower wall, but the upper wall has, a small amount of knobs, but not that many. You can see the rows here. Now on the bottom one, it looks older than the top, so, but not by much older. But look at all the scoop marks, and they're everywhere. I'll zoom in here. Almost every one of these stones has had this tool, that device, dragged over it. Now why is that? Look how deep they went over here. And look at the shapes of them too. Like they're different widths, or somehow they adjusted, because this is wider than these over here. These are narrow. And then we have these big, like, gouge marks. Extremely eroded stone here, it really looks like. But not quite as eroded, I guess. And I guess they're about the same age, but the ones on the bottom just look a lot rougher. But here we see the little the knobs kind of all over, and then there's a badly eroded one up there. But down here, we don't really see the knobs. There was really no attempt to do that. And the stones are pretty big, but like I said, there's a whole row missing here, or many rows. But there is evidence right there, written in stone. These weren't just added later. And these, it even follows the curvature of the stones. So maybe they were cleaning them up. Maybe they got to looking really bad like this, really eroded. But if they went to clean them up, they really did a sloppy job. Look at how they could, kept either they're pressing on it, or they went too slow and it dissolved more out. It does all look like it's done by hand. Doesn't look like drones did that at all. It's kind of haphazard. The stone looks really good. It doesn't really have any marks on it, but then over here, they're everywhere. Solid evidence of ancient stone carving technology. Another view of the first generation. And we have still the effort to trim the edges so that they're somewhat close. Very sloppy on the surface, but we still have the super tight fit. So they had the technology. And this looks like it's the earliest construction here, so we can probably add a few thousand years onto this, over what we've seen already. But who knows? I mean, what are we looking at here? 1,000 years worth, or just a few hundred? This appears to me to be the earlier construction. Obviously, they didn't have any problem moving huge stones. They knew how to build walls, because it's still there. The whole top of the wall is missing. We have scoop marks all over the place. So, one, did they have the scoop machine or device this early on, or were those done later? I think possibly they were done later. So let me zoom in here, point out a few things. Like, for instance, these lower stones down here are angled in to hold everything in. So really, if there's an earthquake, those stones aren't going to do anything but get tighter. Now, it'd have to be one heck of an earthquake to, roll the whole thing over. That's inevitable if it gets big enough, but, for most earthquakes, this wall's held up really well. And you have still the exact super tight fit here, so all that's good. But then there's these scoop marks all over. Why are they there? And there's a lot of, like, the pits, the holes in here. And it looks like they tried to make, almost like they tried to make a bump here just by grinding it off. You can see little square indents all over. That could be erosion, but look at that one. Right down the front of the rock. That's not natural erosion. No one would go up there and chisel that, so that was the device. Right through here, it's all over. So was that someone's idea of restoring? Look how crude that is. That's got to be the earliest construction there is. There's a lot of missing stones. And these holes seem to appear more. You don't see, the knobs. It's mostly indents and holes and kind of a, this is their most primitive example here. But look at the size of these stones. They had no problem dropping them into place. They all fit perfectly together. Now we know that this is a scale model of an actual community of some kind. If you pour water in the top, it goes where it should be going. And I wonder if this could have been carved by a drone. Or if not a drone, then did they have that stone carving technology so miniaturized that you could literally have like a, this particle beam chisel where if you just, worked it in there with your hand as a very small tool, but you could just slowly whittle away on the rock without ever even touching the rock, really. I mean, that seems perfectly logical to me. Why would you not have that? And if you had the rock dissolving technology, something like this is very easy to build. Like I said, I don't even think they had chisels and hammers. It was just too primitive for them. Some people think this is a quarry. I don't think so. For one thing, it's too helter-skelter. For another, it has stairways and things that don't really go anywhere. My final conclusion is this was where they practiced using advanced technology. I mean, where else are you going to practice? You're going to practice right while you're building something? No, you're going to come out here and learn how to use it, get the feel of the tools, test the lasers out. For all we know, these were drones that did this. We don't know who did that. But that's not a quarry. At least that's what I think. It does look like there's a lot of places for people to sit, but some of those stairs are kind of big. They're not really straight. And it just doesn't make any real sense. So it has to be a practice place where they just go to practice. You can see there's a round one up there, and it isn't anything more than that. Now, if it was anything, it has been completely destroyed, and this is all that's left, and maybe this thing was built up another 50 feet for all we know. So that's hard to tell. I guess you'd have to go there because, some of it does look awfully rough, like right here. It almost looks like it just got blasted off. All around here maybe, and it's kind of rough up here in a few places where you would think there would have been carving done the way this has come down at the curve. This is all looks like it's, almost like it's been blasted off. And so, what, 80% of the structure is gone, or this is how it really looks, and it was just a practice place for learning how to use the tools of the trade. More evidence here. Slight protrusions. Great care to make sure that this was perfectly flat and everything fits exactly perfect. And even has curves, so we know no saw did that. Now we can zoom out a little bit, but on the upper right, over here, extreme evidence of machining right through here. They just wanted to just ground it right on down flat here. We've got beveling here, very sharp, flat, smooth. This thing's got evidence of high technology all over it. Another flat, straight edge right through here. My only question, if I had one, was did they put the bevels on after the stones were in place? Well, I think they did. And notice the extreme experience in building walls that don't fall down. They have this zigzag look with huge stones on the corners all angled in, and they're still there. The whole top of that wall is missing. No stones lying around down here. And I don't even know if there's any out here in that city or not. But where did they go? There's a lot of them missing. All the tops of these walls are gone. It even looks like there was an inner wall here. Like this was like a huge wall. But well, I don't know what they were protecting, if that's what it was for. So were they growing stuff or what? But look at the size of those blocks. So they had some technology of lifting those blocks into place and were setting them down. And they had to get them from the quarry too, wherever they came from. This is an interesting photo. Looks to me like the mid-level or mid-age construction. They have the knobs, but then there's this interesting part in the front. Those look like stones with seams, very tight fitting, but they also look like this whole wall has been blown up. Literally blown up. When I start seeing things like this, it makes me wonder, was this place just attacked by someone too, on top of the climate disasters? And here's an old picture, but we have the pock-marked stones a lot here. This is, I think, the earliest construction, and almost looks like scoop marks here too. So either someone tried to clean it up, or they, tried to erase something. But these are all at an angle. I think the actual stones go down farther than this, but then we have the whole top of it is missing too. But it's just everywhere you look, there's signs of this ancient stone carving technology, all laser cut. This, in my view, is a combination of two different ages of construction. Obviously, the one on the bottom here is the oldest, probably the first walls that were ever built here. And I'll zoom in here a little bit and pan around a little bit. But obviously we have a newer construction using the smaller stones on top. Some knobs. Looks like an indent over here. But on the bottom, more of this. Instead of the knobs, it's like anti-knobs. These little cutouts. But there's, pairs. And we noticed before that the knobs were in pairs too. So, but now we have these, where it's the opposite of the knobs. And all of the stones that these are on appear to be the oldest stones in the bunch, although they do fit together with laser-like precision. Even curved cuts here, can't do that with saws. You would never do this with hammers and chisels. They didn't even own any. But the surfaces are extremely rough. Now, this could be extremely eroded, so we're looking at an extra 10,000 years here. As far as dating goes, we've got the, scooper tool going here. But the top looks a lot, newer. Very tight, smoother. So just another example of two completely different ages, but yet the same technology is still available. So I wonder what caused them to go from this, to this, say, up here. I've noticed, well, the stones are smaller. Maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe they just couldn't move these big, huge stones anymore, and they're so, like, look at this one here, so oddly shaped. And then, they're polygonal, but, smoother, tighter fitting. They don't stick out way so much. These were probably beveled a little bit, but they were probably just more like ground down or scooped down. Anyway, there you go. Nice example of the difference in the ages. And a perfect example of the earliest building style. We've got the holes on the bottoms. No knobs. Looks almost like scoop marks here. And if you think about it, it's easier to build the stone and then just make the holes in it than it is to set the stone in there and then, or wherever they make it, and they grind it all down to the point where just the knobs are sticking out. That's a lot of stone to carve out. So the earlier way, maybe they just didn't have enough people, but for some reason, these holes or the protrusions meant something. So maybe this was like, their earlier dynasty had this style, and then later they had knobs. Maybe it indicated the, advancement of their civilization or something. And there's just slight signs of scoop marks here. So someone may have come back later, but not put, and maybe they came back later and put these notches in here like that. I don't know. It must have been a pretty massive civilization to have the need for something like this. And these walls were higher, but some of those stones are just way too big to be moved around by hand. I think that they probably had a little help from directed energy particle beams, but this would be the stuff that was used for peaceful purposes. So was this defaced? It kind of looks like it. This is the so-called the Puma paw. But what was here before, and why did someone think they had to come through and put these and scoop off material off the front of that rock? And just by the roughness too, it looks like the earlier construction. So it's funny that they would put all these symbolism of the animals in here earlier on. So it's like just a tiny little clue to their culture, because we have nothing written. The only thing we have are the clues that are written in stone, and that's it. At first, I thought that this structure had been blasted apart. But where is the rest of it if it was blasted apart? I guess it would be in a million pieces. So this was probably bigger, or part of something that was bigger. And I'm also thinking that this was here even before they built the walls. So there could have been a previous civilization there that was maybe advanced or overtaken by some other people or whatever's, and this is really just a remnant of the pre-polygonal wall builders. Just my guess, just because it's all blasted apart, and a lot of these chunks and stuff are, they're at angles, and you wouldn't carve this thing out at an angle. It would have been level at the time. And where was it? Was it here, or it could have been anywhere? And the only other possibility, of course, is somebody was just playing around with the machine, but you would never carve it, with it slanted like that. And this is especially curious, the rounded out part up here, which isn't really a step, unless this extended out, and this whole piece is gone, literally gone. So that could be a clue to the possibility of another ancient civilization that lived, who knows? That could be 100,000 years old for all we know. And here's a late stage construction. They've toned down the protrusions a little bit, but they're still there, so they have some significance. And I think it's a cultural significance, or it could be just a trademark of the race of people that build these walls. And they just say, no, we build the walls and we're going to leave our little marks here so everybody knows that we built the wall. But those blocks were cut with a laser. There's just no other way to do it. My guess here is those are all individual blocks that were put in there. They were cut somewhere, probably by a machine, and they were all set in there. This structure was probably a lot bigger. And I've noticed that the side up here towards us, it looks like it was blasted out of there, as in vaporized. And dare I say, just because they had the technology and they were using it for peaceful purposes and building stuff, it's hard to believe that, since it is so lethal, that it couldn't have been used as a weapon too from spaceships. And I could see where if you could blast the rock with that stuff and just vaporize it, it would be quite the weapon. And some of this stuff does look like it's been blown up. on purpose. And this piece, I think, is also from the previous civilizations. And it was also used, or rather cut, using the advanced stone cutting technology. I also think this is laying on its side. It should be facing one way or the other. It looks like if you rolled it to the left it might work, because there'd be no reason to build this end. It's not at the right angle, so this came from somewhere else. And these look to me like particle beam laser cut stones, or at least structure. And notice the no erosion on the tops here, as old as this is, but since this was in contact with some kind of the particle beam laser, it did something to the surface that made it resistant to erosion. And I'm not sure if this got blasted off here. That's pretty interesting. If that did get blasted off, how did it get blasted off? Or is this the original surface of this whole stone up here and it just curved around and came down here? But it just looks awful rough around the edges here. But certainly not hammers, chisels, or anything like that. There's only one thing that can do that. Earlier massive construction with the holes instead of the protrusions, rough, indicating extreme erosion. But the size of these stones is incredible. So as old as these stones are, and they are the first constructed walls, I think, look at that fit. After tens of thousands of years, absolutely perfect. And you can even see the machine mark along the edge there where it's all been rounded out and smoothed out. And also resistant to erosion. And those holes there, but the rock is just extremely eroded. I wonder if this part here might even be some kind of plasma damage though, because that just doesn't look right. Earth was hit by many plasma storms in its history, and it looks like this whole area did get hit. In fact, the whole planet got hit. Not only comets and meteors, but we have incredibly hot electrically charged globs of plasma that make it through the magnetic field and the ionosphere and so on, and they actually make it to the surface. And when they hit, it's just incredible. You're talking about instant boiling of stone right on the surface. And plasma does have mass, and it does pack quite a wallop. And this is a confusing picture because, you know, it has the usual stuff, the bevels and so on, and it would be the earlier construction. But why are these two stones on the bottom so smooth? Were they subjected to direct energy, and therefore they just happen to be resistant to erosion? Because they're on the bottom, and these stones up on the top look like they're pretty badly beat up. This one is a little better over here, but to me, and you see the fit on those stones just couldn't be better. They're practically fused together. Look at that. So why is it so smooth? The super old with scoop marks again. More evidence. Of course, the stones themselves are evidence. Just the fact that they fit so tightly, had these curved parts on them here. So so even though they have the laser cut fit, they're very rough. They're very old, but they're just not smoothed down at all. And it's just so completely different, you know. The no knobs, instead they've got these holes in here, and they're just very rough. And they do have the scoop marks on them a lot. So is it possible then that even though they had the technology, they just didn't have the devices, all the tools necessary to do this? Or maybe they didn't have, the drones, or just not enough of the technology, because possibly they were just an outpost at the time that expanded later, and as the better devices came in, and then they were able to do better and better work. Like I said, this had to be a global civilization here, and these builders were probably, with the first outpost, what do? You need builders, so you start building stuff. Anyway, on to the next one. And here we are over at the so-called quarry, but I don't believe this is a quarry at all. You can see where they came in with the device right here, and just scooped it and just went straight down with it, cut in at the top, and then just went straight down. One stroke after another. Looks like the tool was as wide as it is here. So from here to here, here to here. So that was about the width of the device right there. It had rounded corners on it, or edges I should say. And they even left bumps on the wall. So it has some kind of, those bumps, or the protrusions, have some kind of like sacred meaning, I think. And they certainly don't have anything to do with handling the stones and putting ropes around it. That makes absolutely zero sense. And in the later advanced construction, we still find the protrusions, but these are either just in really pristine condition, or they had a different meaning. There's another one just to the right on the wall to the right of this, but look how far out they get, and it looks like they get bigger as they go out too. So what was that all about? But we have the later advance. It's a little smoother. It's not absolutely smooth and perfect, because it looks like it was rebuilt up here a lot. But these are here. That's probably the best example of knobs you'll ever see. And at the same site, we have a different construction style, where we have the long, flat stones, all exactly the same thickness, of course. Bigger at the bottom, smaller at the top, with a square protrusion that gets bigger as it goes out, it looks like. And it's not broken off either, which is unusual. And it looks like there might have been one down here. So that's interesting. Round one on the other type of construction, but then on this type, we have this. So was this a different stage then in their civilization, where they came up with these kind of walls here? Because obviously the construction is pretty good, because it's still standing. And this is what happens when you don't have interlocking polygonal constructed walls, which brings up the question then, is this earlier construction than the walls that are kind of interlocking? Because obviously these don't hold together under earthquake very well. So this might have been pre-earthquake experience construction here. More evidence of ancient technology here on the left. We see the rectangular shape here. Looks like something was destroyed here, and then they used it over here on this block too. For some reason, why were they scooping this out? Makes me wonder if these blocks were as nice as these here in the corner, and something just doesn't look right. I mean, it doesn't look like, why would they do this and then put these in the corner? Just something's weird about that. Another beveled edge right through here. Absolute perfect fit. And here's another place that's falsely called a quarry. It looks like, again, it's been either blown up and destroyed and was a lot bigger at one time, or someone was just playing with the equipment and they were practicing. It's possible that you could have cut blocks out of here, I suppose. So it, maybe it is a quarry, but it's not, why would you quarry on this side and that side and leave this out? And no, this was, I think, a construction of some type, carved right into the whole side. It's all one piece, and for some reason it got destroyed. And I think any of the stuff that got destroyed like that has to be the pre-polygonal wall builders time period. So we could be talking way before the last glaciation, which is 140,000 years ago. It's hard to believe that this is older than 140,000, but maybe it is. I mean, I think it's possible. And here's plenty more signs of the ancient technology. We got the long scoop marks here, deep ones over here. We've got the holes. So we know that this is the oldest construction before or this would be after the construction, or the destruction, I should say, of the previous civilization, where we see that the everything is just blasted away. So, you know, it does bring up the question then also, if they had the technology, then the people before them obviously had it, because they were carving away on the stone. So it looks like this technology has been available for tens of thousands of years before then, and of course we don't know where they came from. Is it possible that, I just don't even see how it's possible, but it's such a long time ago. Could they have just spawned right here on Earth as an outpost? But, you know, like I said in the first video, we have too many different types of humans today that are so dissimilar, it's hard to believe that they all came from one hominid in Africa somewhere. And so I think that they were actually outposts or settlements from other worlds. And I know that's hard to believe, but it really is the only logical choice. And here's another perfect example of the ancient building down here. Ancient. The newer up here. So obviously we have two different, completely different time periods in the construction. And you can tell by the, you know, how it refined. It got better as time went, not worse, better. And then the Inca, I guess, came along and tried to fix it, and all they could find was small stones. Apparently all of these bigger stones you see in here were gone. They're just magically gone. So judging from this photo here, it looks like that cataclysm must have been absolutely devastating, because all of these stones must be from what was destroyed. And they found all these smaller stones that were, I don't know, blown up, blasted, and managed to build all the stuff they did, that they did build. Maybe those missing stones that I keep talking about, maybe they're missing because they were destroyed. I mean, vaporized? Who would attack them? And here's a historical photo of, and I hope I don't get this wrong, Machu Picchu. And here, down here, I'll zoom in on this one part. I'm going to spend too much time on this because I'm running out of time. But here's that wall that came apart. You can see how different everything is. This place has really been fixed up. Pretty nice. Look at that. It's incredible. I mean, a lot of it's there. And this is, I think, after it was cleared. Anyway, really old photo. Alright, I know the video is getting long, but really, look at this. It even curves as it comes down. Totally smooth. And this even has a corner where they came from this direction. And doesn't it sometimes look like this material has been pushed up? I know I mentioned that this was probably eroded it down, and this is more resistance because it's been molecularly altered, so it's more resistant. And this wore down, but I don't know. Some of these really look like this material just got squeezed out and then hardened after the device passed through. But look at these bevels here. That's incredible. You can even see the V shape on that one. And so we see exfoliation happening a lot, and that's when this outer layer peels off. But this usually happens when you get a crack or some small thing and water gets in there, and then it freezes, and so it lifts up this edge, and so it just keeps exfoliating. Like, look at a crack down here, water will get in here, it'll freeze, and then it lifts it up, pops it out, and it keeps eating away. Because granite doesn't really have any cleavage to speak of. And so I would look at this and think, well, this indicates that it was very icy, but then at the same time, I know that they had direct energy technology, and I know that you can alter the molecular structure of these materials. And so what do we have here? Is this the undisturbed stone here, and that this on the top has been somehow treated to make it super resistant? Like if you notice this latest construction, the third level stuff is a lot smoother, and the edges are a lot smoother. And look at that there's a bevel right in there too. And the knob configurations are different. So could it be that they actually treated this somehow? Not chemically, but molecularly, or on a molecular level, to make it super resistant. And now that somehow has popped off. Maybe it got chipped off somehow. Anyway, that's my theory on that. More signs of ancient technology. Perfectly straight edges, laser cut stones dressed on the edges. Over here on the upper right, dressed all along the edges too. Another structure that looks either destroyed or someone was just practicing, but if I look at the erosion on this alone, I would say it was, what are we looking at here? 100,000 years or 200,000 years? If it was that old, then they had the technology even back then. So how do you get these stones up here? Those are pretty big. They're very heavy. They just dragged them up the side of the hill? And that's an awful lot of work. And when you're this technologically advanced, do you work like that? No. And later on, I'm going to show you bigger stones. And I honestly don't think that these were handled at all in any way, except that there was a flying vehicle that had, and you could call it a tractor beam, or maybe it was the directed energy particle beam that's all been adjusted out so that it makes the rock lighter. So they literally could just shine this beam down on the rock. It becomes light. Maybe they can even pull it up. They move it over here with maybe it's a drone ship, and it brings the rocks over here, sets them in place. And they're all pre-cut, pre-programmed. Every block goes in its place, and they just drop them in straight in from the sky. That means they had this technology on spaceships or drones that hovered. It would be naive to think that they didn't have anti-gravity on their ships. And if they did, I don't see where that would be a problem, even if they tied the stones somehow and then they just lifted them up and set them in place. Because a lot of those stones are just plain too big. And if you could make them lighter and easy to handle or maneuver around somehow, it would sure make making that wall a lot easier, especially with those gigantic stones that have to be dropped in just perfectly. So, yes, they had to have had anti-gravity technology, period. They probably used the electromagnetic field of the planet to assist them moving these stones around. Just because we don't have it doesn't mean it never existed. If it's at all possible, then it has to be a possibility. And back over at the so-called quarry, notice the knob built into the side of the mountain. And it's not a quarry. You wouldn't be taking stones off paper thin like that. That was the tool that they used to smooth down this wall. And then at the bottom of the wall, it gets even more interesting. So this is at the bottom of that wall, which you see has been shaved off clean on the back. It's perfectly flat. So that's all been machined. It wasn't quarried. You don't quarry a wall and leave knobs sticking out. And then this is a ledge. So you'd think, oh, well, there must have been quarry in here too. There'd be no sense to this unless you were making, I guess, square stones. and then you could cut through with the laser coming in from the left or just shooting it straight, level, and then cutting them all off. This wasn't a saw, even though when you look closely here, let me zoom that. All equally spaced and equal depth, but this looks like a wide. If it was like a saw blade, it would have to be really wide. So they somehow have adjusted this cutter to be wide, but it comes right down to the end and almost looks like it curves up a little bit. But if that was a saw blade, it would have to be, like a 3-inch saw or something, that wide. It doesn't make any sense at all. And another thing too is these lines are all perfectly straight, and if you look at the end, the way they just kind of trail off up here, like the device just kind of stopped working. It was just the center beam, but it's not as thick as these, and we all do stop right at the base of that wall. And also, the surface is rather resistant to erosion, so it would be hard to date that. But if you were to take thin sections of everything, and if we could just find, the similarity between the surfaces that have been exposed to this particle beam, then that would tell us exactly what's going on. So I'm kind of shooting in the dark a little bit here on that, because I don't really have any evidence like that. But it doesn't mean that it's not going to come along sooner or later. But this is machine-like accuracy here. You can't do this by hand. Those lines are all too straight. Every square exactly the same. Every groove perfect. Here's another quarry that is not a quarry. All the knobs, they're all over. Here, here, here. And this is flat through here. I know it doesn't look like it, but it is flat. And they somehow carved this down so that this sticks out. So it's not a quarry, but because of the presence of the knobs, this may have been some kind of a sacred site. So it's obvious that this was machined. We have perfectly straight edge here and then a little jagged edge here, but it's perfectly flat. And we have, notice the protrusions here. We have, these are square, but these are round, and look how well preserved that is. These get smaller as they go out, not bigger like the other ones we saw, but they are really well preserved, almost perfect looking. But all of this had to be scraped off in order to leave that knob out. So this was all ground down just so they could leave that knob sticking out. And then we got the floor over here. So it's got some kind of a meaning. Here's another view of that. So they have this carved out here. It's flat over here, but then it goes up in here. Hammers and chisels? I don't think so. If you ever needed a particle beam tool, this is where you'd need it, right here. And here, all laser cut. You can do this with a laser. You can make that curve in there just by cutting it from this side. How perfectly smooth and flat. Absolute evidence of advanced technology. Apparently putting big stones up on the side of the mountain was not a problem. More extreme evidence of the scoop tool. You can see how it's the exact shape of it too. It's the same shape in every one. So this particular one had a, rounded on the edges and still overall rounded. And it was just used to remove as much stone easily as possible. So they got down to a certain place. Maybe there was something wrong with the stone and they didn't like it and they gave up on it. But there it is. Evidence. More evidence. More evidence of the pre-existing culture that had to have been there first. And this looks blown up. That doesn't just fall apart. I mean, this thing was blown up. Maybe it was blown up by the people that took over. The ones that we see all these walls, you know, in like Sacsayhuman. But this is just way beyond chisels. But it has been blasted apart. No doubt in my mind at all. I mean, blasted apart purposely. Look at this design over here. It kept going. Who knows how big this thing was. But you'd still have to have the stone cutting technology to do all of this. And we got the doors within the doors. We see that all over the world, carved the same way. We don't see knobs on any of this stuff either, so these were totally different builders. You know, pre-knob style builders. And in this example of stone carving technology, I think this is also from the earlier civilization. All of this rock looks like it's been blasted off. Oops. All around here. All of this. All around the edge. That's not normal erosion. That looks like it was blasted off. And here's the super early construction with signs of advanced stone carving technology here on the left. Those flat sides on the stones. All perfectly cut, but with that same rough look on the front. Massive stones, many stones missing. I mean, there's an extraordinary amount of missing stones. And this rock is totally sliced off. I mean, sliced right off. Like it was nothing. This could have been done from the air by a drone. And these streak marks here almost look like a glacier came down here. And they drag things, you know, in the ice, and it makes these striations on the rock. So it looks like a giant glacier came down through here. So was this a glacier here, you know, 140,000 years ago? Or even earlier? We don't know. Could have been, I guess. But one thing's for sure. If there were glaciers there once, there could be glaciers there again. And I've often wondered if maybe a lot of stuff did get carried away and ground up by glaciers, because there are an awful lot of missing stones, but I don't think glaciers swept them away. They would take everything. I don't know. Another question. More beautifully beveled surfaces here on the edge, impervious to erosion, like right here. That's on a top edge too. Looks like they could have been put there yesterday, except for the surface here. I think that is erosion. I think it probably maybe originally was a lot smoother. Maybe like, you know, down here. The super old. You see it's rough. It's still perfectly fitting stones. And this wall is a lot older, I think, than the other walls. And it's still standing beautifully. I mean, we can tell by the erosion on that rock that we're looking at. It's got to be tens of thousands of years. And who were these people that all they did was build walls? Didn't they build any, you know, buildings or anything? Like only walls? That's all we can seem to find. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? So if you came from another star system and you came to Earth, you had your technology, and so you decided to just start building walls. Well, I don't know. Where are the cities? Were these the cities? And why would you just build just walls? And how could you move those huge stones around? Well, if you came here in spaceships and you had the direct energy, you know, particle beam technology, of course in the advanced state, not the primitive stuff that we have, and you could lift stones, then you would. And it's the only way I think that you could have done that. I don't think they just showed up here and started hauling stones around, dragging them around, you know, manually. They had machines, but even machines aren't going to work. Where are you going to get machines? But if you have this particle beam technology, all you need is energy, and there you go. you're lifting stones, cutting stones, anything you want to do. So when it comes to lifting these stones, there had to be more than just, you know, what we can imagine. It has to be much more. This has been going on in the galaxy at least for probably hundreds of thousands of years. We're newcomers. We just got here. And these people have been here and long gone. But because of, you know, the problems with Earth having the catastrophes, people did survive. And they survived from an ancient, global civilization that was just a mixture of a whole bunch of different people from different places. Like the people in China, they came from somewhere, well, who knows what planet, India. So then, okay, if that's true, then humanoids are scattered all over the place, just like us. Different colors, different shapes, sizes, and so on. But they are everywhere. Where do they come from? And how many are out there? I mean, how many planets are out there that are just full of humans? Just like the humans here on the planet, on Earth. Okay, well guys, I'm running overtime here. I didn't want this to be a 2-hour video. I only wanted it to be 1 hour. And then I'm going to do however many parts it takes to get everything out there. And it looks like today I didn't even get all the way through Peru, but I want to cover, you know, Baalbek, China, and everywhere. So I'm going to have to wind up the video. So while I'm talking, I'll just go ahead and show some pictures. But I do want to say that it is only the logical choice to realize that this is ancient technology that's come and gone. And just because we don't have it now doesn't mean it doesn't exist then, because the only clues that we have are what we're seeing in stone, the tool marks. That's it. That's all we have to go on, besides the, you know, the shape and the sizes of these megalithic stones and stuff. I mean, look at the size of those stones. It's ridiculous. You can't, and look at all those gouge marks. So you can't really say that hammers and chisels did this. Even if you did, look how many chisels you'd wear out. Look how many stones. There are millions of stones. And to get those perfect shapes, that's why I think it's all laid out on some kind of a plan, where they laid out the plan of the wall is all predetermined. Look at that. Look at the big stones missing on the left there. They just disappeared. And that's the earlier construction. Earlier again. Oh. And I love this one because look at that. Is that what the original surface looked like? And this just happens to be the vitrified part? I think so. This is all worn off. And that, man, they must have been smooth and they must have been treated somehow, and it's all flaked off ever since then. But I guess that happens after 10,000 years, 20,000. This is the vitrified surface that I'm talking about, that, and they're using that round tool down here to make these grooves. And notice the shiny surface, and notice that it's rough over here on the edge, but only here where it's treated. That was done with direct energy technology. How smooth that is, so shiny. You'd have to get a thin section of that. More strange construction. This would probably be the earliest with the knobs. These are all square. Still don't know what the significance is between the round knobs and the square knobs, but obviously here we have strange carvings on huge pieces of rock that look like massive parts of it are missing. So are they missing, or were they destroyed? Did a glacier do that? Hard to say. So that's it for part 2. I'm going to have to wind this up. And sorry it's 2 hours long. But believe me, it only gets better. Wait till we get to Baalbek and India and a few other places. It's going to blow your mind. We haven't even covered half of the different types of device marks. So we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Part 3 coming up probably within the week. Bye.